With this year's draft being pretty top-heavy, does it make sense for the Wild to try to trade up and pick up a bigger prospect? Plus, is there potential for the Wild to deal a prospect from an area of depth to try to fill an area where they don't have as much? We discuss on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning into Locked on Wild, we welcome you on board and hope that you stick with us through the offseason into next year as well. If you're an everydayer who tunes in each and every day of the week, we are glad to have you back. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, Jayden Homuth joins us as we look at some potential options for the Wild should they decide to trade up. We'll look at the potential cost, and we'll also take a look at if the Wild should be looking to try to pry a center away from a team with a lot of center depth. My name is Seth Topol, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. As mentioned, we're joined by Jayden Homuth today, and Jayden, the draft is getting closer and closer and closer, and we are going to get to it in a later show, probably for Monday's show, with some Mark Scheifele news swirling around the Wild Twitter sphere. We're going to go and talk about potential draft trades, and so why don't we just start point blank before we start looking into the cost, what it would take for the Wild to do it. With how this draft has been billed, are you of the mind that the Wild should look to try to hop up into the somewhere around top 10 to try to pick up a better prospect as opposed to drafting at 21?
Yes, definitely amongst the minds that believe that we should move up. I originally sent everyone in our little chat, our Locked On chat, that I thought we should try and go up to number 2 to get Fantelli, but that's for the dreamers out there, because I don't think you pass up a player like him if you're Anaheim. I just don't want them to pick at 21. Everyone's known that the Wild have needed a 1C for the last 15 years, and we're still talking about how are we going to get a 1C? How are we going to get a 1C? So I want them to move up. I think that the price is maybe a little bit too high to get into the top 5, as some real experts reported. And I don't know. I don't know how the Wild are, like, it just seems like it's almost impossible to get a 1C if you're the Minnesota Wild, unless you give up players that you really want. But in order to get someone you want, you're going to have to get rid of someone you want. So
yeah, and we've tried here on this show to lay out the possible ways to get a 1C. You draft one, but in order to draft one, you got to probably draft somewhere in the top 5. You could sign one in free agency, but they hardly ever get there. And so the only route you really have is to try to trade for one. And a lot of times you're trading for a guy who is kind of coming back down the mountain. So it is interesting. And so you maybe combine two options by trading up to get somebody to draft at that spot. But that's just kind of where the Wild are at this point. Is if you're going to fill that spot, you have to go get it. Like, it's not going to fall to you as opposed to just kind of allowing it to happen. You got to go make a move to get one.
Yeah, and we're at this icky spot where maybe you do kind of try to go into rebuild mode a little bit to get a top 10, top 5 pick, but you got a superstar that you need to keep happy so you can keep him here. We've never really had that superstar that you need to keep happy. Like, you could have called Parise and Suter the superstars, but they were here for 13 years. They're not. There's no way they're going to you could have struggled for 8 of those years. They can't go anywhere. They had no move clauses. They were here. They were stuck here. Kaprizov, on the other hand, he has 2 more years left on his deal right now until he gets an extension, I think, 2 or 3. If you take 2 years at the bottom of the league, he's someone who wants to win. You could tell just by how he plays and how he carries himself. So he's not going to want to do that. And also, our amazing, wonderful Minnesota Wild fans don't understand that if you really want someone that good, you're going to have to be really bad. So you can't be upset when you're bad trying to get someone good, because you can't just be really good and then get someone really good. The Lightning don't get to pick in the top 5 every year. The Avalanche don't get to pick in the top 5 every year. They had to be bad a while ago. Everyone remembers when the Avalanche were bottom of the league year after year in the early 2010s. Now they won a cup. So there's obviously, and Billy G has pointed out, there's obviously there's a way to win a Stanley Cup, but we don't want to take that way. And I think that's what prolongs this yearly pick in the 20s every year thing. It's just we kind of stay at the same thing. So I think, I don't know, the show's about getting that 1C, I think, and I want to get a 1C. I think the only player that's untouchable right now is Kirill Kaprizov.
Yeah, and it's not a corner that you can really cut. Like, there isn't really a way that you can circumvent unless you just absolutely nail a pick later on. Like, those guys get drafted in the top 5, in the top 10. And so unless you're there just is no circumstance in which those guys fall that far to where then you can say, really? This just fell into our laps, and now we're going to reap the benefits. We'll continue to look at the potential to move around in the NHL Draft on today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Are you tired of feeling restricted in your shorts? Want to look good and feel comfortable at the same time? Look no further than Bird Dogs, the ultimate solution for the modern man. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are specifically designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Say goodbye to baggy, shapeless shorts and hello to the confidence of a tailored fit. But here's the secret. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as those other big-name brands, but they fit way better. No more compromising on comfort or style. They've revolutionized shorts by inventing Cloud Knit fabric, a magical blend that looks just like khaki but stretches, allowing you to move freely while maintaining a slim and stylish lifestyle. When you order from birddogs.com/lockedonnhl, you will also receive a free Yeti-style tumbler with your first purchase. Again, that's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl. Beware, though, when you put on your new pair of Bird Dogs, I guarantee you are not going to want to take them off. I wanted to look at a piece that Joe Smith put together for The Athletic, because he actually tackled this notion of what it would cost to trade up to try to get one of those guys. And let's just talk about a couple of the options, because there were other members of The Athletic, other team reporters of The Athletic that were consulted for this. And so we'll start with moving up to 11, Vancouver Canucks. And what is mentioned here is the Canucks want more D and centers, much like the Wild. So if there is a trade possibility that would give the Canucks potentially Rossi into 21, the Canucks reporter says that he thinks that makes a lot of sense for Vancouver. He said he would do the deal from Vancouver's perspective. The only thing is, I don't know if Canucks management would be turned off by Rossi's size. But again, if Harman Dale was the Canucks, he would roll the dice and do that deal. So Jayden, yes or no? 21st overall pick and Marco Rossi to move up to 11. Is that a price you're comfortable with to get to that point in the draft?
That is a price that I'm comfortable with, only because, again, we talked about, I think once you get past 15 in the first round, you're kind of just shooting a half-court shot to see if they'll be good or not. So I don't think that 21st overall pick this year will turn into anything special. And if it does, I hope everybody comes back to this episode and they blast me on Twitter for it, because I really hope I'm wrong. But so I'm okay giving that up because you're moving up 10 spots. And Marco Rossi, I'm assuming with that 11th overall pick, we would take a center. We took Rossi at 9. He had some terrible health things happen to him, and he's doing great in the AHL, but he just can't seem to find it in the NHL. So he seems like one of those experiments where you don't know where he's at yet. You don't know where he's at yet. I'd be okay taking a shot on a new guy just to see, because you're really, in reality, you're getting the same production from both of them. Neither of them scored a goal in the NHL, whether you draft a guy at 11 or you take Marco Rossi. So, yeah.
I think you're on. Yeah, I think you're absolutely on the right track. And I just wanted to pull it up just for a point of reference. Vancouver in the Athletics, I believe this is their latest mock draft. They have the Canucks taking Nate Danielson, center from Brandon of the WHL, at that spot at 11. So I think you're exactly right. If the Wild would trade up to that spot, it'd be for a center. And
yeah, and if you look at it, again, you got Danielson and you got Rossi. Wait, where are my hands? You got Danielson and you got Rossi. Neither have scored in the NHL yet. That's all I put it at. Yeah. You want someone to produce if you want a 1C. 1C's produce. So if you look at it, you're really it's not really that big of a risk, because you're moving up 10 spots for a wild card when you're giving up a wild card. So I don't know. I think I would take that, honestly, in a heartbeat. If the Wild moved up to 11, if that was a deal that was made today, I would be very ecstatic about it.
Here's another possibility I wanted to discuss, because as they note in the Athletic, you could try to move up to 5 and the Canadians, but the price suggested there is 21, Matt Boldy and or Jesper Wallstedt to get up to the top 5. It's hefty, but maybe with the fact that the Coyotes pick 6th and 12th, maybe that's more feasible, is that you go with one of those picks, maybe go to 12, or maybe you go just outside that top 5 and grab whoever ends up falling. So it would be something similar, I would imagine, to move up with Arizona at 12, a little more than that to move up to 6, but I just don't see a way that you get into the top 5 without paying through the nose to do it.
Yeah, I think you stay out of the top 5 right now if you're the Wild. You didn't, in a sense, it's funny, you didn't have a, quote unquote, for the listeners, a good year to get into the top 5. Obviously, that means you had a terrible year, but if you're not there, don't go there, because if you trade Wallstedt and Boldy, you put yourself there. So I don't think that's worth that. Same with top 6. I think right now, if you're a team that, the only way I think you could trade into the top 10 is if you got to pick in between 11 and 15. If you don't, I think the highest you could go is 11. I don't know. It's just the price that a team has so much power if they're going to trade a top 10 pick or a top 5 pick, because you can really ask whatever you want and you don't sound outlandish. Like if Montreal wanted Matt Boldy, Jesper Wallstedt, and 21, you can't be like, "What, are you out of your damn mind?" You can't do that, because you're asking for a top 5. You're asking for a franchise player. So it's you're going to have to give up a couple good ones. And I honestly don't want to see Wallstedt gone. I don't want to see Boldy gone. But I also want a 1C. So that's where I'm at this crossroad. But I don't want to see those, especially Wallstedt. I think when you get someone like him, not saying he's not, obviously not, he hasn't had a 41 season in the NHL yet, but keyword yet. But that's not something you do right there. I think you try to go up to 12 maybe for a similar price as Vancouver wanted.
Yeah, that moving up to that range intrigues me. So whether or not the Wild do it, we've talked too about the success that Judd Brackett has had drafting where he has in the 20s. Imagine what he'd be able to do with a pick in or around the top 10.
Yeah. So it's something you could talk about for hours, I think, whether you go into the top 5. And obviously, if tomorrow morning we all get a notification saying that the Wild have traded Boldy, Oilstedt, and the 21st, and Sammy Walker for the 4th overall pick, it happened. We know we're going to get a good player. We lost some good players, right? But we know we're going to get someone good. So there's not much. You can't really be mad at it either way. It's a big pill to swallow, giving up that much talent for someone who could be a bust. Neil Yakupov exists. So that's all I'm saying.
Well, the Wild have no shortage of history of players that they've drafted in the first round that have not panned out. I mean,
yeah, like what we picked Benoit Pouliot, a pick before Carey Price. So
State of Hoppy is going to be furious with you, having heard that. But like Adam Johnson is a good example of a guy who they drafted, and
Philip Johansson.
Those guys, me getting into hockey and hearing those names and being like, who?
Yeah, exactly. Like who?
So it does, and that's why my overall opinion about the NHL draft is that teams are just hoping that their evaluation was right and every other team's evaluation was wrong. That's all it comes down to, and their evaluation that a player is going to be able to fit in their particular system.
Just like I don't know if a lot of listeners will recognize the name Dmitry Sokolov. He's a player that I forgot what year it was. I think it was 2018 or 2017. He was projected to be a top 10 pick. Broke his leg training right before the draft. The Wild got him in the 4th round. I did a lot of research on him, watched his tape. I thought he was going to be the next Kucherov. I thought we struck gold. That injury messed him up, ruined his whole career. He's been in Iowa, I think, ever since, and he just can't click. So it's like you said, the evaluation thing. Everyone made the evaluation after his leg. He was projected to be top 10. He dropped to the 4th round. The Wild took a shot on him, and it didn't work. But in the same sense, there's this kid named Kirill Kaprizov over in Russia who nobody thinks is ever going to make his way over to North America. So every team passes over him 5 times, and the Wild say, let's take a shot on him. And now we have a 100-point superstar. So,
and it's things like drafting Louis Belpedio as opposed to sticking where you're at and keeping Braden Point. It's it's you hoping that your evaluation is right and everybody else's is wrong.
In Louis' defense, he had a pretty cool saved goal in that Frozen 4 his draft year. I don't know if you ever saw that. It looks just like, if you remember the 2014 first round against Colorado in Game 1, where I think it was Johnson. He skated the length of the ice and just saved it, and then McKinnon tied it up, and they won in overtime. Looked just like that. And you can find Louis Belpedio on YouTube.
Well, let's move on from this to looking at the potential that the Wild use some prospects from areas of depth to try to acquire some of their own. And so we'll discuss that as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Picture this. You are looking to go to the Twins game at Target Field. And the day of the event, you hop online to try to find tickets, and you cannot find anything that is in the range you're looking for. Buying tickets to sporting events should not be as stressful as it sometimes is. And Game Time is here to help make it a little easier. They are the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. Game Time offers flash deals and last-minute tickets. They make it easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. And the best part about Game Time is they show you views of your seat before you buy them, so you know exactly what's in your frame of sight, so you don't have to sit behind a post anymore. So head to Game Time today, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Continuing today's episode of Locked on Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will continue to navigate through our player evals, but we are going to incorporate more draft discussion as well as we get closer to the NHL Draft. And you can tune in for the Locked On NHL mock draft, which is being released in segments this week. We will take you through everything going through the first round, as well as who the Wild selected with their pick as well. Seth Topol joined by Jayden Homuth. Jayden, let's talk about the potential for the Wild to take a prospect, because let's look at the capital and the inventory that the Wild have this year. They've got their first-round pick, which is 21st overall. They have 2 second-round picks that they got, the second one for trading Jordan Greenway. I still, to this day, cannot fathom how that happened. So you got 2 second-round picks. And you have prospects such as, on the defensive side, Kyle Masters, Carson Lambos, Ryan O'Rourke, Damon Hunt, names like that, to where
Jack Purd, so many.
Thank you. Jack Pert is another one. Do you think it's possible that the Wild look to use one of those players to try to move up in the draft, to try to gain? I think at this point, the Wilds would be looking for some centers, but I think they'll take anything offensively as well, just to try to add to the stockpile. Do you think it's likely that they maybe do something like that to try to make their way back up, maybe back into the first round?
Well, I think when you have a defensive prospect pool that could fill an entire NHL top 6 in 2 years, I think you are a little bit comfortable trading 1 or 2 of them. I think every time I look at the names the Wild have for defensive prospects, you can even throw Kalen Addison in there. He's still growing. And Faber got his job right before the playoffs started, and he's going to be on the Minnesota Wild for the next 10 years. So when you got Lambos and Pert and O'Rourke and Hunt, and you could give up 1, I think. If you do lose 1, I don't think you can overreact because of how well we've drafted. And we definitely have more defensive depth at the prospect pool than we do forward depth. When I think of forward depth, I think of Rossi and Walker, really. I don't know. It's for 2 that I feel like could make impacts at the NHL level, but for defensive, I think you could really if you lose 1, it's okay because you got 5 more. And I think the best one that we have is Carson Lambos. I don't want to get rid of him, but again, if you want something good, you got to give up something good. So.
Right. And I look at the forward prospect pool this way. You've got Rossi here. You've got Sammy Walker here. You've got Adam Beckman here, who I think definitely factors into that group. You have those guys that are here right now. Then you've got your Danila Yurov. You've got your Marat Hustandinov. You've got your Danila Yurov, who are all likely going to come over here at relatively the same time.
Yeah, Liam Ogren.
Yeah, Liam Ogren. Thank you. You've got those guys who are a little further away because you're not really going to do anything with them until they come here.
Yeah, they're all overseas right now, so it's not.
Yep.
Yeah, it's. I think it's touchy with the forwards because we tend to draft a lot of close to home defensemen, but overseas forwards. The way I look at it,
which means you've got more cards in the defenseman deck than you do in the forwards deck at this point. And so you look at that, and it's interesting to me because you look at a team, and I'm going to use the Ducks as the example because this popped into my head the other day. You look at those teams who have depth at forward and are going to have more depth at forward because, barring some just like cosmic level event, the Ducks are probably taking Fantilli too. Like, barring some just shock.
I would be willing to put my life savings on Bedard Fantilli.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see how else it goes any other way.
Which means then that the Ducks are going to add another center to their prospect pool, to their center depth, their forward depth. And so I wonder, too, if the possibility to try to work out a trade with Anaheim is something that this team looks into, because, like, just look at the names of the players that you have. I mean, Fantilli and Zegras are going to be off limits, obviously. But a guy that you had mentioned that I think is intriguing would be Mason McTavish, who is still 20 years old. And so this probably pushes him into that off limits category too.
Maybe, yeah.
But I mean, a 20-year-old kid, but they now have those three guys pretty locked in as forwards. And so at some point, you have those guys. You have three other spots for your top six, more than likely. So there's going to be somebody that kind of gets crunched out. And that may be an opportunity for the Wild to hop in and try to just get somebody that's still relatively young, but that doesn't maybe have strong footing, because now Fantilli's in the mix too. I don't know. I'm just...
Yeah. And like Mason McTavish, when he's at his prime, will not be a third line player. And you can't push Fantilli to wing. You can't push Zegras to, they're all natural centers. You can't, McTavish isn't going to want to just sit down there on that third line. So it's, barring a switch to wing, which I'm sure all three of those guys can switch to wing and be just fine, but they're all natural centers. And another team that I wanted to bring up was Vegas, because they are great down the middle with centers. Obviously a little bit on the older side, and he's not a true 1C, but someone that I was looking at was Chandler Stevenson. I feel like you could get him for not that expensive, and he could kind of be that bridge center leading until the 14 million cap space freelance opens. I feel like having someone like Stevenson, Zuccarello, Kaprizov would maybe benefit, because I don't know. I think Chandler Stevenson's a good enough player to come over. I think William Karlsson's probably off limits. I think Eichel's obviously off limits. Well, I don't think there's a such thing as off limits, because money whispers. So I'm sure anyone in the league is probably grabbable, but Vegas is another team that I looked at with center depth. And maybe another team would be Arizona, but everyone's just so young over there, so they're going to want a bunch of proven players to give you a young player.
I went quiet because I'm looking at some of Stevenson's stats, and I know face-offs don't mean a lot until they do. Yeah. And the fact that he won 58% of his draws, like, even beyond looking at any of the other stuff,
that's what you want.
Okay. But no, yeah, this is what this team has to do if you're not going to get into the top five.
You got to find someone.
These are the routes you need to go. So
yeah, I don't think the Wild are at a spot where you can afford to get a 22 or younger center yet. I don't, unless you tank and you draft in the top five and you get to sign him to a $900,000 3-year deal, entry-level deal. You can't afford a center yet that is that young. So I think you do something like you get a Chandler Stevenson, who's obviously a little bit old. He's a 2C. He's a good 2C, but on the Wild he'd be a first line center, and he's better than Ryan Hartman. Not talking down on Ryan. I love having him on the Wild, but Chandler Stevenson he would be like I said, I made the joke about McTavish being the best center in Wild history if he was ever on this team. Chandler Stevenson would probably be the best center the Wild have had ever.
Well, all in all, it leads to a lot to think about. And it just leads to it is fun. Some of this stuff is just completely like outlandish, but it is fun to just take these things and just kind of try to work them around in your head to see what could potentially happen. So there you have it. Today's episode of Locked On Wilds is in the books. So once again, thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If this is your first time listening, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day, and hope that you stick with us throughout the rest of the off season. If you are an everydayer who tunes in every single day of the week, we look forward to having you back on for tomorrow's show. Make sure you subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes. We have new content every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.